A thought, once transformed into words, can do anything with our health. This was the belief of Dr. Peter Gariaev, a renowned scientist and the founder of wave genetics. Some still consider the phrase, "in the beginning was the Word," to be nothing more than poetic imagery from an ancient text. But for Gariaev, who held a doctorate in biological sciences, this was no metaphor. He devoted his entire life to proving that a word is not just a sound. It is a true force capable of influencing living matter, and he had the evidence to support this claim. Much of his work focused precisely on how words, thoughts, and intentions could affect a person's health. Everything he created aimed to answer a single, profound question: how can words heal? Gariaev often repeated that the world was built by the word. Everything begins with an idea, an inner sensation that first lives within us, wordless and raw. Eventually it takes shape, clothing itself in language, and only after the word comes action. This is how books are born. Inventions, buildings, cities, our entire civilization begins this way. We, as human beings, seem to transform the invisible into the visible through words. Even we ourselves are, in essence, the result of words recorded in our chromosomes. One of his experiments remained etched in his memory. Scientists had deliberately damaged the DNA of a group of plants by exposing them to high levels of radiation, rendering them non-viable. But as part of the experiment, they began transmitting spoken information to the plants in multiple languages. The plants quite literally listened to the information. In one batch of 1,000 seeds, the genetic code began to restore itself. Tadpoles formed out of what seemed like nothing. But the most astonishing experiment involved a tadpole egg. The DNA was first removed from it, leaving an empty shell, lifeless, without potential. Then, informational data taken from a living organism was transmitted to it. And something unbelievable happened. Development began within that egg. Tissues, blood vessels, muscles all began to form. A new tadpole started taking shape from nothing. Even Gariaev himself was astounded by what he witnessed. He grew more and more convinced that a word was not an abstract notion. It was a tangible force, one that governed the processes of living organisms. And if that was true, then words and thoughts could change even what seemed impossible to change. First and foremost, our health. He often said, "A thought, once turned into a word, can do anything to our health." Gariaev's healing matrices. Peter Gariaev often repeated a simple yet profound idea: you must learn how to speak with your body. Not to scold it, not to complain about it, but to communicate calmly and kindly, as you would with a living, intelligent companion. Yet according to his observations, most people do the exact opposite. In their minds, an endless inner dialogue plays out. "I'm sick. I have a chronic condition. This can't be cured." These thoughts, repeated day after day, seem to anchor the illness, making it stronger. Unknowingly, we ourselves keep reinforcing our ailments through the words we use. Mainstream science, it must be said, did not embrace his ideas. Gariaev's theories were frequently labeled as pseudo-scientific. His research was met with skepticism and, at times, open hostility. But sadly, this has often been the fate of those who dare to swim against the current. Gariaev paid particular attention to what he called informational medicine. He believed that in the future, this would become the most effective form of healing, a kind of treatment where the body receives not pills, but pure information, for instance, in the form of sound. Based on his research, he developed unique audio programs and called them matrices. The idea behind these matrices was simple. The scientist compared them to imprints, signals captured from a perfectly healthy organism. He would convert this information into sound waves using a special type of laser. And when a person listened to the recording, their body received a kind of reminder. a signal of how the body is meant to function when in a healthy state. Gradually, cells began to remember what it meant to be healthy and started to repair themselves. Even DNA, Gariaev claimed, could be reprogrammed into a new, correct state. Today, many such matrices can be found online. They are publicly available. However, Peter Gariaev passed away in 2020, and it is now impossible to say with certainty which of the programs circulating on the internet were truly created by him and which are merely using his name. Gariaev's research on the human soul and the screaming threads of DNA. One of the most significant discoveries Gariaev claimed to have made was that the human soul does in fact exist, and according to him, it possesses a tangible nature. His investigations began long before he gained public recognition. As early as the 1980s, he was working as a research fellow at a scientific institute under the Academy of Sciences, focused on physico-technical challenges. Officially, he studied quantum genetics, but he always looked deeper, driven by a desire to understand the essence of life itself, how a human develops from the moment of conception. Yes, science has long known the basic stages of fetal development in the womb, but Gariaev wasn't satisfied with simply describing these processes. What fascinated him was a different question. What exactly directs this process? Why does a child's body form in just this way, with these precise arms, legs, and facial features? Where does this exact order come from? Genetic memory, he believed, was only part of the answer. But there was something more, something elusive, something science had not yet fully grasped. And that something is what he tried to capture through his experiments. Of course, such views sparked heated debates. There were those who openly criticized him, calling his work pseudoscience. But Gariaev had a simple reply. There was a time when genetics itself was dismissed as fantasy. Later, it came to be recognized as one of the foundational sciences of human biology. Perhaps, he suggested, we are simply not ready yet to understand this new frontier. The human body, he often said, is a universe in itself. So much occurs within us every single second that it is impossible to describe it all with a single mechanism. Perhaps it is so complex that we currently lack the means to fully comprehend it. One question in particular deeply troubled Gariaev. Why does the heart of an embryo begin to beat precisely in the 7th week after conception? What gives it that signal? Why that exact moment? He pondered whether living cells might possess some form of primal awareness, as if they already carry within them the knowledge of when and how movement must begin. His ideas encountered fierce resistance, especially from those aligned with pharmaceutical interests. After all, Gariaev was demonstrating that cells respond not only to physical influence, but to something more, something he referred to as a higher force. If this force could be understood, he believed, healing might not require pills at all, but words. Even without scientific terminology, we already know that there are people who seem capable of healing through prayer. Yes, among them are charlatans, but there are also those whose abilities defy conventional logic. One of Gariaev's most striking discoveries was related to chromosomes. He claimed that chromosomes were capable of producing sound, and that these sonic signals were what governed the development of the organism, like commands from a script. To study this phenomenon, Gariaev conducted a series of experiments. He placed fragments of calf DNA into a special medium, then directed a red spectrum laser onto them and listened to how the molecules responded. What he found was astonishing. The DNA nuclei actually emitted sounds. When undamaged, the sounds were calm, low, and steady, like a quiet breath. But as soon as the external influence intensified, the chromosomes began to scream. The sounds turned sharp and piercing, as if the organism were signaling distress. If the laser beam became too powerful, The DNA was destroyed. The matter was no longer alive, but the sound remained, now chaotic, without harmony. In one of his experiments, Gariaev accidentally irradiated dead cells and, to his astonishment, discovered that even they retained a trace of vibrational sound. It was extremely faint, almost imperceptible. He called this phenomenon the ghost of DNA, and this ghostly vibration lingered for 40 days, the exact period, according to ancient folklore, during which the soul remains nearby after death. Over time, the technologies Gariaev developed became so precise that he was able to use them to restore seeds damaged by that same laser. Seeds that had seemed hopelessly destroyed. But sound, memory, and information, together, they gave these seeds another chance to begin life anew. This led Gariaev to believe something truly radical, that life is not just a chemical or biological process. It is a form of structured information that can be recorded, transmitted, and even restored. If sound alone could awaken lifeless cells, if irradiated DNA could remember how to be whole again, then perhaps our bodies are far more than we've ever imagined. He often emphasized that our cells are constantly listening to the words we speak, the emotions we feel, the intentions we form. When we fill ourselves with despair, resignation, or anger, we are sending signals to our bodies, reminders, instructions even, that something is wrong. And the body, obedient as it is, responds accordingly. But when we fill ourselves with faith, kindness, and harmony, it too begins to shift, recalibrating itself toward balance and healing. Gariaev envisioned a future in which medicine would no longer rely on chemistry alone. Instead, healing would begin with meaning, with language, vibration, consciousness. He imagined clinics where patients wouldn't be treated with pills, but with waves of restorative frequencies drawn from the blueprints of healthy organs and tissues. He dreamed of diagnostic systems that would listen to the body's sound, much like a symphony, and detect the slightest disharmony long before disease could take hold. To many, it all sounded like science fiction, but to him, it was simply the logical conclusion of everything he had seen in his work. And yet, for all his bold theories and experiments, Gariaev never claimed to have all the answers. He saw himself not as a prophet, but as a seeker, someone who sensed that life was vastly more intricate than we dared to admit, and who refused to stop asking questions. He urged others not to blindly believe, but to observe, to test, and to listen, not only to data, but to their own inner knowing. Because perhaps in the end, the most powerful medicine of all is the one we carry inside us. A word, a thought, a breath of belief, each one a spark that can reignite what seemed lost. Today, the legacy of Peter Gariaev lives on, though his physical presence is gone. His departure in 2020 marked the end of a remarkable journey, but not the end of the questions he raised. His ideas continue to stir minds, provoke debates, and inspire those who dare to think beyond the limits of conventional science. In many ways, his vision stands as a bridge between biology and consciousness, between matter and meaning. He reminded us that we are not just flesh and bone, not merely the sum of proteins and cells. We are living stories, songs made flesh, and the language we speak, both aloud and in silence, may shape us far more than we know. His experiments, his matrices, and his insistence on treating the body as a conscious, responsive being, all these form a body of work that challenges us to rethink health, disease, and what it truly means to heal. Not everyone will agree with him. Not everyone must. But even his fiercest critics cannot deny the beauty of the question he posed. What if words are more than tools? What if they are keys, able to unlock the forgotten codes of life itself? We may not have all the answers yet, but we have something just as powerful, the will to keep searching, to keep listening, and to never stop believing that somewhere within the silence between words, life is speaking back.